Have you ever noticed that some of the kindest people you have ever met are also some of the most tired people? They are the ones who always show up and always smile and always say yes when you ask for help. But if you look closely enough, if you really pay attention, you can see the deep exhaustion in their eyes. You can sense that somewhere behind that kindness is something deeper and heavier, maybe even something darker. We often imagine kindness as this pure, uncomplicated good. We tell children to be kind, and we admire kindness in leaders, and we measure our own humanity by how much compassion we can extend. A kindness, like everything else in this complicated world, has a shadow side. And when you ignore that shadow, kindness itself can turn into something destructive. It usually starts small when a child learns that being agreeable earns them love. When they put their own needs aside to make others comfortable, they are rewarded with praise and affection they might not receive otherwise. Over time, this association buries itself deep inside their nervous system. Kindness becomes survival, and the harder it becomes to separate who they are from what others expect them to be. They become the reliable one, the good person, the friend who never complains. But here's the truth about that role. When kindness is forced or driven by a fear of rejection or a desperate need to be valued, it is no longer pure kindness. It becomes a mask, and masks, when worn too long, start to suffocate the person beneath them. Think about the people in your life who are endlessly kind. They will listen to your problems for hours and help you move and lend money they do not have. They will sacrifice their own rest just to make sure you are okay. At first it feels admirable, even saintly. But if you have ever been that person, you know the truth behind every act of self-sacrifice. There is a quiet resentment, a voice that whispers, "What about me?" But that voice is often silenced because chronic kindness comes with an unspoken rule that you are not allowed to put yourself first. Psychologists have studied this phenomenon and call it compassion fatigue. It describes what happens when someone gives so much of their empathy and care that they eventually run dry. Healthcare workers and teachers experience it, but everyday people who identify as kind souls are at risk too. Studies show that people who consistently prioritize others over themselves report higher levels of anxiety and depression and physical health problems. Kindness, when unchecked, becomes self-erasure, and that is the dark side. Kindness without boundaries is not kindness at all. It becomes a subtle form of self-destruction. It is like watering every plant in the garden except your own roots. Eventually, the gardener collapses and the entire garden withers with them. But here's the more unsettling part. Sometimes kindness itself becomes a weapon, not in a manipulative way, but in a quieter, unconscious way. When you are known as the kind one, people start to expect it and shape their behavior around it. Without realizing it, your kindness teaches others that your needs are secondary and your feelings are negotiable. Over time, people stop asking what you want because they assume you will always adjust to them. The kind person ends up training the world to overlook them. This creates a cruel paradox where the kinder you are, the more invisible you become. And invisibility is not peace, it is loneliness dressed up in politeness. Now, none of this means that kindness is bad, far from it. Genuine kindness is one of the most beautiful forces in the world. But there is a vast difference between kindness that flows from abundance and kindness that bleeds from emptiness. One heals while the other corrodes. One comes from love while the other comes from fear. Let's look at the facts. Research published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that agreeable people who struggle to say no are significantly more likely to experience burnout. Another study out of Berkeley showed that altruistic behavior increases well-being only when it is voluntary and authentic. When kindness is performed out of guilt or obligation or fear of disappointing others, it actually lowers happiness and increases stress. And yet so many of us get trapped in this cycle. We do not want to disappoint anyone, so we keep saying yes. We do not want to be perceived as selfish, so we keep giving. We do not want to lose love, so we keep sacrificing. But the cost of this endless kindness is enormous. Slowly, you begin to lose sight of yourself, and you do not even know what you want anymore because your entire identity has been built around serving others. You become a stranger in your own skin, and here's where the monster within comes in. When you suppress your needs and deny your anger and bury your boundaries, those emotions do not disappear. They collect in the shadows and ferment, and eventually they come out in ways you cannot control. Maybe it is snapping at someone you love for something small. Maybe it is passive-aggressive comments or resentment leaking out in subtle ways. Or maybe it is even darker years of repressed feelings exploding all at once, leaving you shocked at the person you have become. We like to imagine that kindness protects us from darkness, but in reality, kindness without honesty creates the perfect breeding ground for it. Because every time you say yes when you mean no, or smile when you want to cry, you are abandoning yourself. And abandonment always has consequences. Why do we do this? Why do kind people struggle so much with boundaries? The answer lies in our culture and conditioning. From a young age, many of us are taught that kindness equals worthiness. We learn that being agreeable is safer than being authentic, and that love is earned by what we give, not by who we are. Children who grow up in environments where love is conditional often carry this belief into adulthood. They become adults who confuse people-pleasing with kindness. But true kindness does not erase the self, it includes the self. If your kindness is costing you your mental health and your joy and your energy, then it is self-neglect dressed as virtue. Neuroscience tells us that the brain has a mirror neuron system that allows us to feel empathy. When you see someone in pain, your brain lights up as if you are in pain too, which is why kindness feels so natural. But mirror neurons do not distinguish between healthy empathy and destructive empathy. If you constantly expose yourself to suffering without boundaries, your brain floods with stress signals. Over time, this leads to chronic stress responses and emotional exhaustion. Your brain is not built for endless boundaryless kindness, it is built for balanced connection. So the dark side of kindness is not that kindness is bad. It is that kindness can be twisted by fear and unhealed wounds into something that eats us alive inside. When that happens, the very thing we thought was our greatest strength becomes the thing that breaks us. If you have ever felt this exhaustion and resentment, you are not broken. You are experiencing the natural consequence of a world that does not teach us how to protect ourselves while giving. The monster within exists because unexpressed truths eventually demand to be seen. So how do we embrace kindness without letting it destroy us? The answer lies in one simple but deeply uncomfortable truth. Kindness must begin with you. If your kindness does not include yourself, then it isn't truly kindness at all, it is performance. Think of the safety instructions on an airplane. You must put your oxygen mask on first before assisting others. At first glance, that advice feels wrong. But the logic is undeniable, because if you pass out from lack of oxygen, you cannot help anyone. The same principle applies to kindness. If you neglect your own rest and well-being, your ability to care for others eventually suffocates. This is where boundaries enter the picture. For many kind people, boundaries feel terrifying, like rejection or selfishness. But boundaries are actually the purest form of honesty. A boundary says, this is what I can give and this is what I cannot. It says my love is real, but it cannot exist if I am empty. It says I care enough to show you my limits, because without them, my care will rot into resentment. Psychologists describe boundaries as the invisible lines that define where you end and another person begins. Without those lines, relationships blur into dependency and silent suffering. With them, relationships become clear and mutual and grounded in respect. Research shows that people who set healthy boundaries often experience deeper relationships because their kindness comes from choice, not compulsion. People who respect their own boundaries are actually seen as more trustworthy. Because when they say yes, you know they really mean it. Their kindness is authentic, and authenticity is magnetic. But setting boundaries requires you to say yes to yourself, which can feel like betrayal if you equate worth with selflessness. You might lose relationships in the process. Some people will push back or accuse you of changing or withdraw from you. That is painful, but it is also necessary. Relationships built on the expectation of endless giving were never truly balanced in the first place. There is a concept known as pathological altruism, where the desire to help actually causes harm. It happens when constant rescuing prevents another person from learning independence. It looks like kindness but creates dependency and guilt. This ties into the cultural myth of the good person. We idealize kindness as a virtue, but often in a way that encourages self-erasure. Phrases like "she is such a good girl, she never causes trouble" hide a dangerous assumption. We assume goodness means never making demands and never disrupting the peace. But real goodness is about showing up as your full, authentic self and still choosing compassion. When kindness comes from authenticity, it liberates, but when it comes from fear, it enslaves. So what can you do practically to shift from enslaved kindness to liberated kindness? First, practice the pause. When someone asks something of you, do not immediately say yes. Take a breath and check in with your own needs. Ask yourself, do I have the energy for this, and is this aligned with my values? Even a few seconds of reflection can save you from automatic people-pleasing. Second, learn the power of the gentle no. A no does not have to be harsh. You can say, I care about you, but I cannot take this on right now. The world will not fall apart if you say no, and the more honest you are, the more people will respect your yes. Third, reframe your worth. Your value is not determined by how much you give away. You existed before anyone needed you, and you are worthy of love, even when you rest and take nothing on your shoulders. Fourth, tend to your own garden. Fill yourself with friendships that feed your soul in moments of stillness. When you live from abundance, kindness becomes a gift rather than a transaction. Fifth, allow yourself to feel the harder emotions. Anger and frustration are not enemies of kindness, they are signals. They tell you when your boundaries are being crossed. If you listen to them, they become guides that point you toward balance. For many people, kindness has become a lifelong mask worn to cover exhaustion and avoid conflict. But masks are heavy, and the longer you wear them, the harder it becomes to remember your own face. The real journey is to remove the mask and let kindness come from the real you. The you that can say yes and no with equal honesty. If you want to know who you truly are, look at how you treat yourself when no one is watching. That is where authentic kindness begins. Do you rest when you are tired? Do you forgive yourself when you fail? Do you speak to yourself with compassion? If not, then your kindness to others is built on a fragile foundation. When you treat yourself with true kindness, your kindness toward others becomes more powerful. It comes from overflow, not depletion. It inspires rather than exhausts. It invites others to rise with you instead of leaning on you endlessly. The dark side of kindness is not about rejecting kindness, it is about transforming it. It is about moving from compulsion to choice and from survival to love. So the next time someone tells you that you are so kind, pause for a moment. Ask yourself if this kindness is coming from fear or freedom. Ask if it is coming from the mask or the real you. The answer to that question will tell you more about yourself than any compliment ever could. Because at the end of the day, the monster within kind people is not their anger or their limits. The real monster is self-neglect. Once you face it and set down the mask, you will discover that your kindness doesn't disappear. It grows stronger and sharper and more radiant. It becomes the kind of kindness that doesn't just keep others alive, but keeps you alive too. And maybe that is the ultimate kindness. To live fully as yourself without erasing or performing or apologizing. To show the world that compassion doesn't mean disappearance, it means truth. That is the kind of kindness the world needs most. Not endless yeses or silent suffering, but the courage to love without losing yourself.